evening. I'm so glad that you all are joining us this evening to a digital pop-up hosted by the Christian nonprofit PAX. My name is Dorcas Cheng-Tozun. I'm the editorial director with PAX. And this is actually the third pop-up that PAX has hosted since April. And this is just our way of supporting our community and providing some measure of expertise and encouragement to those of us who are on this journey of trying to figure out our calling, our creative pursuits. I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about PAX. PAX is a Christian nonprofit that seeks to inspire the church to pursue the peace and justice of Jesus through contemplative formation. We have a particular value for and a focus on supporting young adult Christians of color. And so we produce a lot of creative content, which you can find online. We have a story arc publication, we have Bible studies, we have guides, there's some incredible original artwork. We also have a fellowship program that's coming up in September for BIPOC young adults between the ages of 20 to 35 to support their spiritual development and vocational discernment. And there is a particular focus for writers. So if you are interested in taking that next step, please stick around at the end. I'll talk a little bit more about what the fellowship entails. It also includes tracks for digital artists, for social entrepreneurs, and for survivors of trauma. Learn more at our website, which is madeforpax.org. So in addition to being the editorial director at PAX, I also am a writer and a published author. So I have published 3 books. 2 have gone the traditional route, and then 1 has been independently published. And I will say that all 3 of them involved a very long, hard road. And so this topic of this webinar is very close to my heart. And so I have the pleasure today of being in conversation with Jevon Bolden, the founder and CEO of Bolden Media Group. And just so you know how this next hour is going to go, Jevon and I are going to spend the bulk of our time talking about 2 main topics: the state of diversity in publishing today. So why is that important? How does it affect writers of color? And then secondly, what recommendations do we have for writers of color to build your career and get noticed by publishers? And then after that, we're going to reserve the last 15 minutes or so of our time to address questions from you. So please be thinking of questions that you may have as we are talking. You are welcome to put them in the Q&A box anytime during this next 45 minutes. And there is also a chat box. So questions go in the Q&A box. Chat box is for you to interact with one another. We also have some great PAX staff that are working behind the scenes and can answer questions you may have about PAX or the fellowship, or maybe even about this webinar. And we'd like to get to know you. So please, participate in the chat, introduce yourself. We'd love to know where you're coming from, what genre you write in, anything else you'd like to share. And again, if you have questions for Jevon, for me, for both of us, please put those in the Q&A function because we will be sure to see those. Now, I know you're all eager to hear from Jevon, but before we get to her, at PAX, it is a typical practice of ours to just pause and get centered before we dive into things. I'm guessing it's been a busy day for most of us. It may have taken quite a bit of effort just for you to get here. And so I want to thank you for being here and just give you permission to take a couple of deep breaths. Try to ground yourself, center yourself. And then you're welcome to close your eyes and just listen. I have this beautiful poem by Chicana writer, poet, and playwright Cherie Moraga that I'm going to read, called The Welder. And I hope that you will find this poem to be inspirational as you think about your journey as a writer. If you'd like to follow along with the poem, the words are going to be in the chat. So this is The Welder. I am a welder, not an alchemist. I am interested in the blend of common elements to make a common thing. No magic here. Only the heat of my desire to fuse what I already know exists is possible. We plead to each other. We all come from the same rock. We all come from the same rock, ignoring the fact that we bend at different temperatures, that each of us is malleable up to a point. Yes, fusion is possible, but only if things get hot enough. All else is temporary adhesion, patching up. It is the intimacy of steel melting into steel, the fire of your individual passion to take hold of ourselves that makes sculptures of your lives, builds buildings. And I am not talking about skyscrapers, merely structures that can support us of trembling. For too long a time, the heat of my heavy hands has been smoldering in the pockets of other people's business. They need oxygen to make fire. I am now coming up for air. Yes, I am picking up the torch. I am the welder. I understand the capacity of heat to change the shape of things. I am suited to work within the realm of sparks out of control. I am the welder. I am taking the power into my own hands. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest for the evening, Jevon Bolden. Jevon is the founder and CEO of Bolden Media Group, a literary agency and book publishing consulting firm that exists to cultivate, amplify, and advocate for the works of inspirational women writers, authors of color, and diverse creators of faith whose ideas move the world. As part of her work, Jevon is a book editor, writer, literary agent, and author of 7 books, including her bestseller, Pray, Hear, Write, 21 Days of Prayer and Fasting for Breakthrough in Your Writing. Welcome, Jevon. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Dorcas. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here with everybody. I'm excited about our conversation.
I am as well, and I have read your bio multiple times at this point, and every time I am amazed because it seems like you have done everything in the publishing industry, right? Is there anything that you haven't done?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah.
But definitely very grateful for the opportunity to try all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, we are grateful for the opportunity to learn from your expertise and your experience. And so before I dive in with Jevon, I just want to remind everyone again, please put questions that you have for her in the Q&A box, and we will be addressing that as we go and later on in the hour. Jevon, I thought that we could start with a question that just will help everyone get to know you a little bit better and give some context for your personal experience. Can you share with us how you got into publishing and what were some of the obstacles that you faced along the way?
Yeah, that's always a question. That is a question I actually get asked pretty frequently, as we'll, kind of get to in just a minute. There's not many African-American women in publishing, let alone in the editorial part. And so yeah, I got into publishing sort of, it was not intentional. One thing I wanted to do was to do something that I loved. I grew up in a predominantly African or Black Christian community, and there's just certain things that, it was a middle class educated community and university kind of community. And so excellence was the driver, and you're going to go to do things that'll make your community proud, that you can, reach back to your community and things like that. And so one of those things, for me was I was going to try to be a doctor. That was my original goal, which would have been fine. I wasn't terrible in the sciences or maths, but I just started to think about, what will I really enjoy doing for the rest of my life? What will be fulfilling? What will just check all the boxes? And so you know, as I thought about the classes, I don't know how I even got to this decision-making process, but I thought about the classes I didn't skip in high school. And English was the only one that I tried to rush back for. And so anyway, yeah, I just kind of changed my major and did not know there, you know, as far as hurdles, you know, things that I had to face was, number one, I did not know anything about publishing at all as an English major. My minor was sociology. I just knew that I loved these studies and these focuses. And so, you know, I took it upon myself to do some research. And the only thing that I saw people like me doing that was sort of in this field were magazine editors. I was a big fan of Essence magazine and, you know, different things like that. And so I was like, well, that's what I'll go and do. And so I started applying for entry-level jobs, you know, for people who would hire someone with an English degree. And it turned out to be one of the only few. I do believe in God, and I do believe that God has providence. I believe that he orders and directs our steps. So one door opened. So I was like, okay. And it was a small Christian publisher in Florida. And that's what I went and did. I probably applied to like 30 different places, but that's how I got into publishing. I was a copy editor at first and gradually moved up. So yeah, some of the hurdles I think came in my career, where I was given a lot of opportunity. I was encouraged to grow as much as I could, and grow means work as hard as I could, work harder than anyone else, put in more hours than anyone else. Maybe I'm not, definitely these people were, the team I worked with were incredible. But it was still, you know, at the time I was hired, I was the only person who had a English degree on the team, Bachelor of Arts in English, entry-level salary, very, you know, low paying compared to what I would have been making if I was a neurosurgeon like I thought I would be.
Exactly.
And so there were some things there. The company did not necessarily use titles in a way that would have supported me. So I was part of the leadership team making leadership decisions, but not given a leadership title. And I feel like some of those kind of things professionals of color may face a lot of times. They'll be counted on to do the same work as some of their executive peers, participating in meetings, making decisions, all kinds of things like that. And not actually be given the tools they need to progress in their careers. So I would say those are some of the hurdles I faced. Of course, there are ways that I've gotten over them by creating. So a lot of people of color will find themselves making their own way, figuring it out, you know, being adjacent to, you know, the industry that you're a part of. You know, you may become an entrepreneur, you may become a consultant, or you may find creative ways to get your hands on interesting projects or work with, you know, certain clients, you know. So yeah, all of that is my story.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Jevon. I think there's some really interesting themes, right, that kind of run in your story. It makes me think a lot about, you know, so I'm from a Chinese immigrant family, and yet there is that same expectation, right, that I think you see in a lot of families of color, of, you know, you are going to grow up to be this professional that has a lot of status in the community and brings in a lot of money, and you can support your family and you can do all this stuff. And so something like writing or being in publishing, it was never presented to me as an option. I didn't even know. It was like I knew intellectually that these jobs existed, but I didn't really think that I could potentially do anything related to it until much later on in life. I didn't start writing professionally until I was in my early 30s. But I think, you know, that lack of, you know, having the options presented to you, the lack of representation, right? Not seeing people who look like you do this. And then once once you even get your foot in the door, it just continues to be kind of this uphill climb, right? Of like, I do feel like every step of the way, you sort of need to find your own way. And so, you know, I'm really glad that you've been able to find that to some degree, and there are others that, you know, have as well, but it's not easy. It's quite a long and tiring road. And so I think I'd like to delve into, you know, exactly what it is we're talking about when we talk about people who don't look like us, you know, not seeing people who look like us in publishing. What really does publishing look like today? And so some slides with some charts are going to come up as Jevon and I are talking about this. But Jevon, I know that these are trends that you've been following. You participated in a committee that was researching diversity in publishing. Can you talk us through what does the publishing industry look like today in terms of diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely not a statistician or anything like that, but definitely have been aware of, you know, sort of just a little bit of lopsidedness, not a little bit. And
very
so
nicely.
we're hoping that soon it will reflect the culture that we live in, the demographic that we have in the US, at least. I mean, if we're talking about US publishing. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at a slide right now that's from Lee and Lowe's 2019 diversity baseline survey. And we can see that, you know, according to their numbers, 76% of the publishing industry is white. And then we go down to 7% being Asian, Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, so forth. And I mean, and then we just see the numbers get lower, 6%, 5%, you know, on. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, even as we see like newer studies, there's been, you know, PW did another study in
Publishers Weekly, just for those.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
yeah.
please forgive me. Publishers Weekly also did like they do it. I think an annual or semi-annual survey, a salary survey. They did theirs in 2022, and we're a little bit different, where they found the industry being 83% white, which is still, these are, you know, astounding numbers that we'll talk about in just a minute about how they impact publishing, you know, going forward. And then the team that I've been a part of, the committee that I've been a part of, we just recently, as of last year, and then releasing the numbers this year, did a, I'm sorry, we released our numbers, yes, this year. You know, we just recently did our own baseline survey for Christian publishing. And it's just a little bit worse in Christian publishing, just, you know, than it is in publishing at large. So we did not, because this is a developing area of study, we still have some things to work through. You know, so our sample size was limited. I think only about 26% of the 70 ECPA, Evangelical Christian Publishers Association members, participated in this study. So our margin of error is quite a bit larger. So here in this survey, I'm sorry, in this slide that we're seeing now is, you know, we're looking at executives and senior managers. These are your decision makers. 94% of them are white or Caucasian, and 6% are BIPOC. So we do see where the disparity can be, where the biases can be. And yes, I'm seeing the emojis going up. It is shocking. It is shocking.
Yeah, it's shocking in not a good way, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jevon, there's a question that came through that was kind of pointing to historical trends. And I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but do you have some sense of these sorts of diversity numbers in publishing? Has there been any movement? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Is it staying the same?
I think the last thing that we're seeing is that from the time when we were really counting, because you have to understand that because of people establishing their dissatisfaction with how things are, that makes people want to figure out what in the world is going on. Money is affected. And so when money is affected, we want to solve the problem. We know that, in our current US population, people of color are growing in numbers. And so there is a desire to be represented. There's a desire to be served. And so I don't know that we've ever measured. So there's not really a way to say how it has been historically. We can go by how we feel. But what I do think we are seeing is that the numbers are not greatly improving even now after having conversations. So Lee and Lowe did their very first one in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And so from 2015 to 2019, there was not a huge jump in that. All we're doing right now is setting a baseline. I mean, that's what the thing, that's what the name, that's what the kind of survey.
Which, I mean, I think that in and of itself is kind of extraordinary, right?
Yeah.
Right. 2015 was really not that long ago.
No,
and so
it
the
wasn't.
fact that we only put the resources toward doing this research starting a few years ago speaks to what has been, or maybe more accurately, what has not been the priority in publishing, right? And so I think that that is also very telling.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that this is happening, but it is, I mean, it's a big ship to turn.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll be curious to talk to you a little bit more later, Jevon, about what that looks like, how we can begin to turn that ship. But first, maybe if we can try to contextualize these numbers a little bit more. I mean, so they're shocking numbers, they're unfortunate numbers, but what does it really mean that the publishing industry looks like this? Like, especially if we're talking about new writers, or writers just trying to get themselves established. What does it mean for them and their ability to break into the industry, to get published? What are the specific barriers that they may be facing?
So one of the things I think is that we sort of, if you're a person of color, you kind of know what this is like. You enter a room and immediately you may be trying to figure out, well, who else looks like me in this room? Who else is here? Who, if you're, especially if you're going into a room that you've never been in before, something like that. And so if you're used to always seeing yourself in the room, I guess if I'm speaking about how the industry is mostly white, you're not really going to be you don't have to look for anyone really. So I said that because having people of color in publishing leads us to publish more people of color, because people of color look for each other. And white professionals have not necessarily had to, there is this kind of obviously relationship thing where who matters and things like that, and getting in rooms and recommending friends and so forth. But then if your friends are all white and so forth, you just kind of go to what you know. And so having diversity on the teams leads to more diverse publishing, kind of by default. One of the things I thought was interesting, I hope it's okay if I just kind of throw this in there.
Yeah, go for it.
Is that when I was an acquisitions editor, I was told that, and I'm gonna mention this again, but I was told that the target audience that we were writing to were middle class, middle age, sort of maybe younger to middle aged women, white women. And so I'm trying to figure out, well, who do white women want to hear from? I'm trying to figure out, how do I find authors that white women want to think of? And I'm thinking, well, Black people read, so those are if you have people of color in the room, there's going to be this tension, which is very important. Tension is important. It's not negative. So that there's kind of like, well, who's our audience? I remember seeing this person read from my community and them loving books like this and loving books like that. And so, yes, somebody's saying options change because there are different people in the room. Conversations change because there's different people in the room. So having a lack of that creates much of the same. We're just repeating very similar things. And audiences of color, readers of color go largely underserved.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaking as someone who's been interacting with the publishing industry for over 10 years now, I would not say that it is a very high risk industry, right? So they like to go with kind of what they know,
Yes.
what has been proven. Like you're talking about, like, this is our audience. They're sometimes, but not always. There isn't necessarily this idea of like, let's expand our audience or let's grow our. It's like, no, this is what's worked for us. So this is who we want to
Right.
continue serving,
Yeah.
right? Or even, I have a friend who is an acquisitions editor now, and she is a woman of color. It is very much a priority for her to acquire books from women of color. At the same time, she has a mandate from her imprint that these folks have to have a certain they have to have a certain platform, they have to be at a certain place in their career. And she's also competing with other publishers to try to get all of these, everybody's going after the same people with the same big platforms. And so when there isn't a willingness to take a chance, right, on somebody who maybe their story is really different, maybe they don't have the traditional platform that that publishers tend to see, right? And so I feel like there can be sort of this chicken and egg thing that we get stuck in of like, well, how does it begin to change if the publishers just keep looking for the same thing that feels safe to them?
Yeah. I mean, that has been something I've sort of combated or come up against a hurdle when it came to acquiring as well. I mean, even now being an agent, similar thing, but of course I'm not specifically acquiring for one publisher. It's the same, almost a very similar idea. But how can I, as an editor, and this is the challenge, this is what I mean by sometimes working harder than maybe your white counterpart. How do I show what an audience and what a platform looks like among this people group? You know what I mean? Or among this, in this particular community, because obviously when you look at an author, they have their platform or they have their group that they speak to. How do I show that their ideas and their message is compelling and is engaging and that people really, really want it? How do I show what it looks like? Because it does not necessarily look the same. You may not know the schools they went to. You may not know the list of people who are on their, we haven't gotten to this part, but writers' book proposals, when you're talking about putting a book proposal together and you want to list the people who will write an endorsement, how do you show a white publisher or a most majority white team that this person of color has influence if they don't know who these people are, who what the community is,
right?
So one of my jobs that I took upon myself, one of my responsibilities, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but that was what came with the job. I have to show what platform means in this part of the world or this part of whatever.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned the P word, Jevon, I'm going to take that as my cue to jump to that question, because I think that is a huge question for so many writers nowadays, especially if you're just starting out, trying to figure out, trying to get to that point where you can query an agent. I see a number of questions coming through about, trying to figure out how to query agents, or if you're wanting to pitch to publishers directly. How can that look for emerging writers of color? Because I feel like the expectations nowadays are so heavy on us authors, right? And I have seen so many writers, and myself included, where we have just overstretched ourselves and contorted ourselves to try to fit a certain definition of what platform looks like. And it's exhausting. It can easily burn you out. And a lot of times you're not necessarily being authentic to who you are, right? Like even though I love writing, I'm never going to love being on social media, which is like the number one thing that you hear publishers mention, is they want the social media numbers to be up. And it has never been my thing. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what hope is there for new writers as they're thinking about platform, and what might be like creative approaches that they could take?
I mean, that's a big question. You know, one thing that you and I kind of talked about offline and, you know, as we were preparing for this was a sense of authenticity. And I do coach writers a lot, especially, first of all, as an agent, of course, I'm coaching, but then I also am a writing coach and have been in a position where I've been able to give advice in that space. I think authenticity is very important. And then authenticity is sort of relative to what you want to accomplish. So there is an industry, there is a standard, there are requirements. How do I, as a creative person, flip these things on their head so that they feel authentic to me? Do I need to reframe my thoughts about social media? Do I need to reframe my thoughts about these are my readers on the other? I write to be read. How do I engage with them, you know? And so one of the things I think is important for new writers is to not see social media as a curse. That is your opportunity to interact with the people you want to serve. You get to mind their business. You get to see what their pain points are. You get to see what they're struggling with. You get to see their responses to the latest news. You know, you get to see a lot of things. In a lot of ways, social media can be sort of like your case study, you know. So I would really encourage writers as they're considering building platform, you know, how do I flip this to see this as an advantage? And then also, you know, when you think about getting a job that you want, there are certain requirements that come with the job. You know, the industry does have certain standards. Some of it, you know, we're working on adjusting, which, you know, will come. I'm an optimist in that area. I'm believing for the best, but, you know, and there's also a part, yes, you know, you have the best access to the people who want your message, your story, your voice. You are the closest one to that. You can become the expert of that group of people. You can become the voice for that group of people. You can become the inspiration, your words, and you can be authentic still. So those are some of the things, you know, I kind of encourage just a little bit of reframing, because I know it's challenging, but I also do it too, you know, so I'm not like sitting somewhere in an office, you know, not having experienced that. You know, I'm involved in social media on purpose. There's a lot of things I did on purpose so that I could be able to share, because I'm surprised people, I'm just as introverted as many of you out there. I'm just as, you know, loving my home and private quiet time as many people. But I did step out into social media and do some things to see, you know, how can we do this and love it? You know, how do we see this in a different way? And then, of course, the platforms. If the platform is not working for you, try something else, experiment, you know, do something else. Sometimes it is very, you know, maybe you don't like Facebook, you know, but maybe Instagram is better. Maybe you like, you know, Twitter, or maybe you like TikTok or Tumblr or something else that feels more authentic to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and the reality is that Jevon and I have talked about how we're both introverts, and we're probably both going to collapse in our beds after this discussion happens. But there is some stretching that needs to happen, right? Like if you are serious about wanting to pursue your writing career, there will be times where you will need to step into places that feel uncomfortable. And that are stretching for you. And I would say also, if I could add to your great point about platform, Jevon, I mean, what I love about what you said is I think it's so much about genuine connection and relationship building, right? It's like you're not just getting the numbers just to get the numbers. It's like you really want to know who are these communities that I'm trying to reach, and I want them to know me, and I want to know that my message is connecting. And so there is real connection happening there. I will also say that if any of you happen to find me on social media, you will see, even to this day, I do not have impressive social media numbers, and I never have, and I probably never will. And yet I have still managed to get 2 book deals. So it is possible. There are other types of platforms that you can develop. You know, one that I have really relied on is becoming a contributor to publications that have much larger platforms than me. And so you can sort of, you know, ride the coattails of their platform and say like, hey, I'm a regular contributor to this publication, and that really can count for a lot with publishers. I think also, any networks, associations, organizations, churches, communities that you are a part of, that is also, part of your platform of, these are the people that I know, these are the people I can reach. And so those are other ways that you can sort of pitch, not just social media, but other approaches to, like Jevon said, like reach the people you want to reach.
Yeah, that's very good. I love it.
Yeah. So we're starting to get into the nuts and bolts now of what writers can be doing, so I think it can feel like the cards may be stacked against us. And so what advice would you give to, so again, we've had a number of questions come in about querying agents in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak to that, Jevon, of what advice would you give for querying agents? Should it be a priority to try to find an agent of color? What sort of mistakes are the main pitfalls that you see new authors falling into?
So I do want to speak a little bit to having an agent of color. First, I'm going to say, as an acquisitions editor, I absolutely saw that having an agent was beneficial for authors of color. There are things in the contract that can be negotiated differently that you may not know, or as a novice, or you may be a little uncomfortable negotiating on your behalf. You may not want to ruffle too many feathers. So having an agent can really increase the offer that you get, the publishing offer, if depending on how far along the journey you are. I definitely saw a difference in numbers, so that's important. The other thing that I think is important for authors of color is we can sometimes come into a space and not want to feel like we're too much. We're grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for, and I know that there are authors of color who often get fast-tracked into publishing because someone saw them on social media doing great things and they were contacted by an editor, and they didn't have an agent. So I even have some clients who come to me after publishing 2 or 3 books without an agent. And by the time we're working on their deal, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how great it would be for me to have had an agent for these other projects. So the other thing so just having an agent is a benefit. There's also steps along the publishing process we did not get to, like marketing, book cover design, editorial, people handling your voice, and people talking about, the editor working with your voice, the editor helping you say what you need to say more clearly. And sometimes there can be some gaps in understanding, especially if you're working with a white editor. Sometimes, not all the time. You do not have to have a white editor, a black editor of color necessarily, but sometimes it's helpful depending on what you're writing. So whenever there's some tension in the publishing process, having an agent can be very helpful in that, to help you navigate those places. And sometimes, there's all kinds of challenges going through the publishing process that can happen. There can be, difficulty, like I said, just understanding each other. So sometimes it's very helpful to have an agent, period. Then, so when it comes to having an agent of color, it can be helpful because you could say something to your agent of color that you want to convey when it comes to your pitch process, your pitching process, your proposal or anything. And they can sometimes translate that so that into language that the publisher can understand. And that becomes a selling point because it's your unique perspective, it's your unique offering. And so an agent of color can sometimes know that a little differently. They can also recognize sometimes when you're feeling a little uncomfortable. You may not say something, but sometimes your agent of color, because they've been in rooms where you're going, they've been in those rooms ahead of you and different things like that, they can kind of pick up on unspoken things where you actually need an advocate, or where you actually need encouragement, or you need, they stand up for you or advocate for you in a certain way because they have had certain shared experiences with you. There's other things I could share along those same lines, but those are some of the things I think are really important.
Yeah. Are there any particular challenges that, so you have, let's say a relatively new author of color has gotten themselves an agent, yay, but doesn't have the book deal yet. And so then where do they go from there? Like what challenges could they face as they're trying to, interface with these publishers and get their work out into the world?
Oh goodness, I mentioned this already, just the publishing team not getting it, does not understand. One of the things I want to make sure that I also say that things are getting better. I want to say this. I don't want anyone to come away from this conversation feeling like publishing is just not going well, right? There are conversations that I'm able to have now that I've never been able to comfortably have. Comfort is relative, but we're saying things a lot more upfront. There's a level of understanding that we have to broach uncomfortable, parts of the conversation or topics. So, even if, even as, so misunderstanding is a big thing. Misunderstanding, not really getting the concept, not really understanding what you're trying to do, not understanding the audience, not understanding why there's certain things that you want on the cover or don't want on the cover, not understanding what you need for marketing. There's just sometimes just misses what how to reach the target audience. I know that we hadn't gotten to this just yet, but we were talking about just because I'm an author of color doesn't mean I have to write about this or that, but still there's part of you that goes into your work. You cannot write outside yourself, right? And so there are parts of your message that need to have some of you in it, that sometimes, and that needs to be highlighted even in the marketing plan or in the PR things. Who are you interviewing with? Whose show are you going on? Why don't you want to go on this show? All kinds of things, to me, that having an agent helps you navigate.
Yes. And one thing I want to highlight, Jevon, that I think you're explaining quite well, is that the publishing process is complicated. And
Yes.
so it's not like you just work with your editor and that's it. There are so many steps to it, and you're interfacing with multiple departments, multiple individuals. So there is your, original editor, but then there's going to be the copy editor and the proofreader and the book cover designer and the person who does the layout of the text and
your marketer,
the
marketing
PR.
team, the PR team. Yeah,
absolutely. And every step of the way there is a risk, right, of there being some misunderstanding, of there being, and so there's been a couple of questions around like going with an agent versus going on your own, working directly with publishers. And I can say for me, so I had an agent with my first book, and then my most recent book that came out, I didn't have an agent. I'm really glad I had one the first time around, because it was just such a new and overwhelming experience. And like you said, Jevon, she was fantastic in negotiating for me. Like, she increased my advance by 25% just by asking. And I never would have even considered asking, because I would have been like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take whatever you can give me, right? Because you're publisher number 50, and all 49 have said no. And so of course I'll take whatever you want. But so it was great to have her in my corner. And there were some, challenges along the way with figuring out release date and things. And so it was just wonderful to have someone to be able to call upon. With my most current publishing process, I was working with a much smaller house. And so in that way, it was easier to build relationships. And I think having already been through the process, it wasn't quite as intimidating. But even then, I found myself like I had to really be on the ball every step of the way. Right. So it's like, okay, so the editing went well, the cover design went well. Oh, but what about marketing? And what, like, you can't ever quite take your eye off the ball, because there is that risk that something will get slightly derailed, even 90% of the way there, because because somebody has missed something about
Yeah.
what you're trying to say or what your book is about or who you are as an author. And I've definitely heard multiple horror stories about cover designs that just were completely, culturally inappropriate, like completely.
Yes, yes,
So,
yes.
so I think, there are just very different experiences, I would say, with going with an agent versus not. And maybe it kind of gets to what you were saying earlier, Jevon, about platform. There is also this sense of what is your goal? What are you aiming for? Right.
Yeah,
And so I
yeah,
think there are things agents can do for you that you can't do on your own in terms of, they can open doors to larger houses and better deals. But I don't know. I actually have quite liked working directly with the publisher too, and feeling like I was able to build a really close relationship with them. But it's a smaller house, and so they have more limited resources, and there are things that they're not going to be able to do. Um, but they also gave me a lot more attention because it was a smaller house and they didn't have as many authors that they were working with. So I think there is some. I don't think any publishing process is going to be perfect. And so to go into it thinking about what is most important to me and what do I want to get out of this process.
yes, yes, absolutely. And I would say, and you do have to figure out, you have to know what, like you said, what you need and what's important to you. Some writers only want to worry about the content and only want to focus on the actual, production of the content and the story and all of that. And they love it when someone else is, making sure their back is covered. You know what I mean? And then the other thing too is there are different kinds of agents. Every agent is not the same. So that's important that you find the agent that fits the needs that you have. And sometimes you don't know your needs all the time. So there are authors who have changed agents, you know what I mean, through their process, or they've gone unagented on some things. But yeah, I think, just also know that agents are not all the same. They don't all have the same backgrounds, even in publishing. There are some who have sales backgrounds, marketing backgrounds, no backgrounds, and then editorial backgrounds. And so, so that's important to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And just a very quick note, there are some unsavory agents out there. So please, be on the lookout. Make sure that you are advocating for yourself. Make sure that you understand what a typical agent does and does not do. I once was offered a contract with an agent who refused to let me see the contract until I signed with her, which made no sense. She refused to show me the contract. She refused to tell me any of her terms. She refused to tell me who any of her clients were. I know but these people actually exist. And so, so to just know that there is some measure of care and thoughtfulness that you'll need to take. Just because someone says that they are an agent doesn't necessarily mean that they have your best interests at heart. And you are very much within your right to switch agents if somebody is not working for you, if they don't get you, if you don't have a good relationship with someone.
Make sure you know what your contract says with your agent.
Yes.
So yeah, because some do not make it easy for you to quickly change. So just be mindful of that.
Yes, that is true. That is true. You can't necessarily just jump ship right away, but know how that process works.
Yeah.
So I want to move to addressing some of the specific questions that have come in. We've had quite a few come in. We've covered some of them sort of generally, but one specific one that came in is, in your opinion, Jevon, what topics are Christian publishing houses seeking more writers to address? So says she's in particular is wanting to write about singlehood and was told that this topic is saturated. So I don't know if you have thoughts on singlehood specifically, or if you just know of in general what are Christian publishing houses interested in and maybe not interested in nowadays.
I don't know that I can speak directly to singlehood, the single life. I think it depends on how you're treating it, how you're handling it. But I would say that different publishers are looking for different things. That's the other thing. But there is a sense that, coming out of something as impactful as a global pandemic, people are dealing with a lot. There's a sense of trying to figure out who you are now on the other side of things, how to rebalance some things, how to get back to thriving, so wellness and mental wellness, peace, self-care. So these are some of the trending types of things. And you can look at these in a number of different ways. So that's why it's kind of hard to, so I would still say did they specify Christian publishing specifically or?
Yes, Christian.
Okay, so I would, say that we're still, heavy into the Christian living and spiritual growth category. And then there's just the sense of human thriving. So that would be more toward the relationship advice, self-help type things. There's also, this the diet and fitness and wellness, health and wellness category. So I would say if you're kind of in that space, you're doing pretty good. And yeah, so I'll just stop there.
Okay, yeah, great. And here is a specific question about platform. The question is, what's considered an infancy stage platform? A publisher requested a platform beyond the infancy stage, but wasn't specific about what that meant. And maybe another way to think about that question is like, at what point can a writer feel like, okay, I have enough of a platform that I can very seriously start querying agents or publishers? How do we know we've reached that point?
Wow. So that's a challenging question because there is no number for that. There's no hard and fast rule for that. I think when you have a sense of demand for your message, where you're getting asked to speak on certain things, asked to write towards certain things, asked to show up in spaces based on kind of, what you're writing on. And then I recognize too that there are memoir writers and fiction writers, things like that in the room. So, I think when your writing is bringing some attention. So platform, I think that's something we did not get to, is that platform is different for different genres. We did not talk about that.
That's a great point.
So the reason when we're talking about platform for the room, we are talking a lot about nonfiction writers. Platform for children's book, children's authors and fiction authors is not quite the same expectation. Your writing is your ticket in. Your writing has to be absolutely superb in both of those genres. Very children's children's writing is extremely specific by age and category. And then nonfiction platform is like really, really important. And so so that's what I mentioned, a demand for your message and kind of, people wanting to know the message that you're offering, wanting to hear from you. You can kind of get a sense that you can start getting ready to query that. So that's different because Dorcas, you brought up some really good points about writing in other spaces and things like that. That's important because then you're able to kind of get some interesting data like downloads and, reads and clicks and things like that. You kind of get an understanding for how much people are wanting to read what you're writing. And so that is beyond social media. That's beyond sort of like having certain itinerary, but all of those play into understanding when you're ready. When your followership and things like that, those have a lot to do. That helps publishers understand, oh, people want to hear from this person. That's really what that's answering. Because again, it's a for-profit business. So they're definitely wanting to know that there is an audience waiting for your message. Yeah. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful.
Yes. No, that's great. We have a question from Stokes. I apologize. I haven't been reading everyone's names who have been putting in questions, but Stokes is asking about, why there are so few BIPOC traditionally published authors, and how that might compare actually in the independent published industry? I don't know. I mean, since we have so little data in the traditionally published industry, I would guess we probably have almost nothing in terms of independently published. But do you have some sense of how it compares? How many authors of color are going that route? I think I've seen also a couple of questions that have been referencing, like, should we go that route? You know, is there a point at which it's a good idea to just go and be independently published instead of trying to go the traditional route?
Okay, so I have to back out. So backing up to why are there not as many BIPOC authors as there are white authors in publishing? And I feel like we sort of addressed that at the beginning, where, you know, first of all, historically speaking, some of us, we couldn't even really be in the United States. So, you know, we weren't even, certain rights weren't even ours, you know, couldn't vote, I mean, there's all kinds, you know, weren't allowed to read, you know, legally not, you know, so historically, I mean, we had to come a long way, a lot of BIPOC people, to even be able to, you know, publish. So there is catch up isn't even the word. We're not, I mean, I don't even know how to describe what needs to be happening at this point. But I mean, that's some of the why. I mean, we could go into even more of that, but, you know, obviously there's some bias, and historically publishing was established for white men, and white women were not even published. So we need to understand that too. And so it's just been recently that white women have been writing and being published. And so so that's that. And then the other thing is, are there more authors of color who are publishing independently? I don't know the data on that. I could only imagine probably so, because a lot of us, we just do what we want to. We've always done what we wanted to. You know, I'm thinking about how things were published on, you know, papyrus, and some of the most ancient books in the world are from Africa. And, you know what I'm saying? So, like, you know, we've been publishing whether anybody gave us permission or not. So, and it's been, I guess you call that independent publishing, for thousands and thousands of years ago. So I would imagine just the nature of how we have moved through life and history, I would imagine we are probably publishing a lot independently. The other question was, when should you publish?
Versus going the independent route.
Yeah. I think only you can know that. I would say there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. Talk to some folks, find out, you know, get some feedback on your writing. Don't write in a vacuum. Find out, you know, is this something I should really be pushing toward? Because the other thing, so there's the thing of patience, and there's the thing of, you know, is this important for me to do now, and why? You know, your whys are very important for understanding what you should do. I published my books independently because I wanted to. I wanted to get them out. I didn't even consider traditional publishing. I wanted to be able to handle them the way I wanted to. I do understand publishing. I don't, and then come to think of it, at the time that I published them, I have no idea if anybody would have published them or not. I didn't ask anybody, didn't think to ask anybody. I had the contacts and the resources. I knew how to, and I just did it. And so I had my reasons, like I just mentioned, why I did it. It's been a blessing to a number of people, which is all that mattered to me. I just wanted to get my words on a page. And so I think you have to determine that for yourself. And like I said, I would definitely bring in some other voices and some other people to kind of help speak into that. Choose wisely who you have speak into your writing process. That's very important. But it's good to kind of bounce things off of other people. And a lot of times we're feeling like we're alone in the process and there's no one else who understands and things like that. And it's good to bring other people in to feel supported, number one, and then to also get some of their wisdom and help you make a good choice in that area.
Yeah. Well, I love that, you know, talking about you self-publishing all your books, Jevon, it gets back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of sometimes you just got to do things your own way, right? Like we may not we don't know when or if or how the industry is going to catch up to where we would like it to be. Right. And so if you feel like you have something really important to say, and yeah, then it is definitely a viable route to
Yeah,
get your
and you
words
can
out
do
there.
it well. You can do it well.
And do it well.
There are plenty of professionals who have worked in the publishing industry, who are freelancers, who have their names on Reedsy lists, and Reedsy is a website with that lists freelancers and all kinds of sites. You know, Fiverr I'm really kind of picky about, but you know, you can find good people to help you publish if you want to do
I mean,
it.
I do think though that gets to one of the challenges, which is that it takes resources.
Oh, it does.
Money to
Yeah, it does.
self-publish.
It
And
does.
for sure, you don't want to do it on your own. You need a team of people around you. You need people reading your manuscript.
Yes.
You don't want to just be the only person who's
Do
ever
it
seen the
well.
words before you put
Do it
them
well.
out there.
Yes, do it well. Make
Yeah.
your message, you know, be a good steward of your message. Do yourself proud, you know, put yourself out there well. Do a good job.
Yes. And I will say also, one thing that you just touched upon, Jevon, that I want to emphasize, for me, it has been a huge help in my writing journey to connect with other writers, to be part of writers' networks, writers' groups, informal, small critique groups, larger networks. There's a couple of folks here who are children's book writers. So if you have not yet checked out the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators,
I always have.
SCBWI.org, you absolutely have to check them out because it is a fantastic resource at the very least. Just on their website, they have a ton of stuff. They have chapters that meet all over the world, actually. I was living in Hong Kong at the time and found a chapter there. And so, but you need to be part of those communities because those are the folks who are going to help you improve your craft, get you connected. And like Jevon and I are just talking about like 0.5% of what, you know, writers need to understand to, you know, along their journey, right? And so there is so much more wisdom to be gleaned from other writers around you, who have been there, who have done it, who are trying to figure it out with you. So I would definitely recommend that. I also wanted to ask you, Jevon, because we are running out of time, but some folks are asking for specific resource recommendations, like resources for finding an agent, resources for putting together a strong book proposal. What are there specific people, books, websites that you would recommend that people look into?
I know that I think we're putting it together a resource list for everybody. So that's one thing that'll be emailed out to, I think, everyone who's participating. The Christian Market Guide, Christian Writers. Oh, I'm messing it up.
Christian Writers Market?
Yeah, market guide. Is it Christian Writers Market Guide? I think it is. There's a picture of it on my Instagram. I'm not helpful at all, but that's a great place to start looking for getting to know who the publishers are. There's also one for the general industry. I know that everybody on here is not publishing Christian books. So yeah. And then there's also a website called Literary Agents of Color that you may find a directory at. There's also one for Black literary agents. I'll have in the resources. And then again, finding those writers conferences where you can connect with people is also very helpful. Finding agents and editors, even practicing your conversation, talking about your book proposal, your book idea, and so forth. Those are great things. And I'll have some resources that I'll have links and all that kind of stuff that I'll be sending over to the PAX team to share with you all.
Yes. So as Jevon mentioned, we will be sending a follow-up email that has a whole bunch of resources. You all are amazing because I see people posting tons of links in the chat, sharing with one another. And this is what it's all about, is writers supporting writers, because we all need one another, especially writers of color. Like and I do really feel like, you know, the high tide lifts all boats. Like any of us who are doing well, like all of us, it helps all of us. So thank you all for supporting one another and encouraging one another. And I just want to end with one last question, Jevon, because we have been talking so much about do this, do this, do this. And it's really overwhelming. There's a lot that we can do in the midst of trying to get published. But Nighty Hess asked the wonderful question, which is, how do you encourage writers to rest in the middle of the exhausting process of publishing?
Oh my goodness. I think rest is like one of the most powerful weapons we have. Writers tend to be very, very engaged in the feeling the world around us. We feel deeply, we are also working very hard to try to figure out things. We're beyond our craft. So building, a way for you to, and rest is not the same as sleep. I think, that's also very important. So
give me part of rest, yes.
Yes, sleep is a part of it, but also knowing how to take a break, knowing how to, and I mentioned this earlier, reframing certain things that happen to you, being able to be, if a lot of people, I don't know, some of us journal. So being able to have places that you share your thoughts, if you have a therapist or a journal or a friend or somebody that you can call, being in community, that's part of nurturing and resting and being restored and being refilled where you need to be. Staying inspired is another way to kind of keep your reserves up. And I encourage writers to, if you get any compliments or opportunities on your writing, write it down. Keep a running list of the good things that you hear about your writing and the doors that open as a result of your writing. Rest is about restoration. So it's not only, like I said, it's not only sleep, but you're going to need some of those good things to comfort you on the days where it's hard. Where you read maybe somebody saying, maybe you send somebody just a note, a DM or a, note card, a thank you card, and they were just amazingly blessed or something. Hold on to that kind of stuff and just realize how powerful your writing is, how powerful the words are, how liberating they are, and just kind of stay in that place. Also take comfort in the stories of other writers who have made it. Reading memoirs, writing memoirs, watching, documentaries, or I keep a subscription to Masterclass. That's part of my restoration. I'm about to go on vacation, as a matter of fact, and I'm thinking about, okay, what are the things I'm going to do to, restore. And so yeah, always think about that and make sure that if you are in a season, that's the other thing, discern your season. Sometimes you're in a season of writing. You've got to get this project done and your sleep may be less than usual. Yeah. Make up for that in other areas. Maybe you're eating well, drinking a lot of water, walking, whatever you need to do to keep that balance, but realize that should only really be for a short time. Don't keep that going. Find your way back to a natural rhythm. And if you need to plan better, some of us are procrastinators, that happens sometimes, especially when you're dealing with a lot of anxiousness. And so, yeah, just be mindful of your rhythms and what you need to restore. Come out of those, quickly exit those seasons of lack of rest and lack of sleep, and make sure that you're taking care of yourself really well in the off season. Yeah. Have an off season.
An off season, yes. I would say joy and being with the people you love, right? When we write from a place of health and balance, I think our voices are stronger and more authentic and more compelling to those who read our words. So love that question, love that response. Thank you so much, Jevon. This has been an incredible time. I feel like we could have gone for 3 more hours. Maybe we need to do another one of these. Let us know if you all would like us to do another one of these, because I do feel like there is so much that we didn't get to cover. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. We are, as Jevon said, going to send a list of resources. It will probably be a pretty long list to all of you after this, so that you'll have access to more information and to, figuring out your next steps. And I just want to thank you, Jevon. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise, your wisdom, and thank you for your advocacy work in supporting authors of color, in helping to push the publishing industry to become more diverse. And so we just really appreciate you spending your time with us this evening.
Absolutely. It was incredible. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you all.
PAX has a PAX Fellowship coming up in the fall. It will start in September. We're accepting applications now. It is a 6-month program from September to February of next year for young adults of color, ages 20 to 35, who want some support in their vocational discernment and professional development. And there is the incorporation of faith and justice and peace as well into your vocation. We are specifically focusing on emerging writers, but also digital artists, social entrepreneurs, and survivors of trauma. But if you're in a place where you really want to take your writing career to that next step and you feel like you need some mentorship, you need some guidance, you want to figure out how to integrate and your love for justice, then I hope you'll consider the PAX Fellowship. If you go to madeforpax.org/fellowship, you'll find a ton of information there. We actually just extended the application deadline. It was June 30th, which is way too soon. And so we're extending it to July 20th. So I hope that you will check it out, pass it on to your friends and others that you know who may be interested. And then you're welcome to check out all the other things that we do on PAX as well. We fairly regularly work with other authors, and it's my greatest joy to collaborate with authors of color, writers of color, poets of color, to bring out your voices and do what we can to amplify and escalate and get your words of wisdom and love and kindness out there into the world to bless everyone. So thank you all for participating, for being such great, engaged members of the audience. This has been a wonderful, wonderful evening, and I hope to see you again soon. Blessings to you all.